In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. When I took my first seminary class, I was 50 years old. And I thought that I was really something smart ahead of the rest of the class. That was until I started reading my first article for theology. I ended up having to sit there with the paper in one hand and a dictionary in the other hand. To facilitate retention, I underlined any word that I didn't know, and I wrote the definition in the margin of the page. And with each word that I had to look up, I got more and more frustrated. About the 10th word I looked up was the word vituperative. And I started thumbing through the dictionary to find it. And I said a few words that I probably shouldn't have said. And I broke out laughing when I read the definition. It said, vituperative, an outburst of violently abusive language. Okay, so I had just given myself an example of what the word meant. Now, all that is to say is that seminary teaches you big words. Big words like theophany. A theophany is the appearance of a God in a visible form to a human being. Our lesson today from Exodus is a theophany. So is our gospel lesson. There are a number of theophanies in the Bible. Most of them just aren't as dramatic as today's lessons. We can consider a theophany to be an experience of God. So we are going to talk today about mountaintop experiences. Our gospel lesson is a theophany. Jesus is being transfigured before his disciples, and the appearance of Moses and Elijah along with him. Moses and Elijah traditionally represent the law and the prophets. They are the two historical figures that were taken up into heaven without tasting death. And they are the two historical figures that had a dramatic experience of God on a mountaintop. So according to our story of Exodus, Moses went up the mountain and the clouds settled on it, and it stayed that way for 6 days. On the 7th day, God spoke to Moses, and there was a devouring fire, it says, on the mountain. Now, I don't know what God's voice sounded like, but the movie 10 Commandments made it sound really scary and loud, with lots of lightning and thunder. So Moses waited for that 6 days, and then God called to him out of the cloud. And the glory of the Lord, the fire, could be seen all the way down at the base of the mountain, where all the people were anxiously waiting. So Moses is up on that mountain for 40 days with fire and thunder and all the dramatics you can imagine. Our reading doesn't go very far, but when Moses came down from the mountain, his face shone as bright as the sun. You can't meet God without it being visible on you. He had to wear a veil over his face when he came back down the mountain because the people couldn't bear to look at him. I don't know if you remember the story of Elijah. Elijah was running away from Jezebel, running for his life. As a matter of fact, he traveled for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Mount Horeb. That's the same as Mount Sinai, where Moses met God. Now, Elijah's experience was quite different from Moses's. There were some dramatic effects, an earthquake, a tornado, and a fire. And Elijah looked for God in all of those things, but God wasn't there. He wasn't in those dramatic effects. It was in the silence that followed where Elijah met Moses, quietly speaking about the things that were to come. Now, in our gospel lesson, once again, the experience is as much the benefit for the benefit of the watchers as it is for the participant. In Luke's version of this story, they go up on the mountain so Jesus can pray, and the disciples fell asleep. See, in Luke's gospel, every time Jesus goes somewhere to pray, the disciples fell asleep. But for Matthew, it was very important that the disciples see what was happening. Jesus was revealing himself to the disciples. We get the same kind of dramatic effect of a theophany, the dazzling white effect, the clouds surrounding them, and the voice from heaven, the affirmation that this was indeed the Son of God, and the injunction that they were to listen to him. Just 6 days before this happened, Peter had proclaimed that Jesus was the Son of God, the Messiah. And on top of being complimented for Jesus for finally getting a right answer, he turns around a few minutes later and gets chided because Jesus says, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and I'm going to be arrested and they're going to crucify me. And Peter comes up and says, no, you don't have to do that, Lord. We'll protect you. Jesus says, get thee behind me, Satan. So here God says, listen to him. And Peter still gets it wrong. Let's stay up here and build 3 booths. Peter understands that there is something important, very special happening here. And he's scared to death, but he's willing to stay with it, to remain there with God, with Jesus. It reminds me of a song sung by Amy Grant called Mountaintop. It goes something like this. I love to sing and I love to pray, worship the Lord most every day. I go to the temple and I just want to stay, to hide from the hustle of the world and its way. And I love to live on a mountaintop, fellowshipping with the Lord. I'd love to stay on that mountaintop, 'cause I love to feel my spirit soar. But I've got to come down from that mountaintop to the people in the valley below, or they'll never know that they can go to the mountain of the Lord. That's what it's about. Coming down from that mountain so that others can learn about God. That's why the voice comes, to tell Peter, listen to him. Of course, by this time, the disciples were flat out on the ground, trembling with fear. But Jesus touches them, overcoming that fear, and says, get up, don't be afraid. When the disciples looked around, they were all alone. Each of these people and the groups of people experienced God in their own way. Each one a little different. Each one involved in some kind of waiting. We're getting ready to enter a period of waiting. The 40 days of Lent are a time for reflection, for looking at your life. This is a time where God is speaking to you, ordering your life to touch it and to transform it. To help you, I have copies of a small book from the Living Compass called Living Well Through Lent 2017. It has reflections from our own Bishop, Andy Doyle, and from the Father Bob Flick, who is the former rector of Church of Lord of the Streets in Houston. Like grace, it's a free gift. Please take one home and use it to grow with the Lord during Lent. Each person is called to make some kind of significant change in their life. That change is for the purpose of reminding us that we are God's people and that we too get to experience God. I invite you to reflect on how God is calling you to experience Him during this coming Lenten season and how He is reaching out and speaking to you. Amen.